I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak on such a pertinent issue that is affecting the Bahamian democracy, that being corruption. Corruption can be defined as an abuse of power for personal gain, be it public officials or even those within the business sector. Corruption costs. The IMF has estimated that corruption costs the world economy as much as $2 trillion each year. Public budgets are exhausted, and it is the very citizens who pay for corrupt activities through increased taxes. But corruption not only has an economic cost, it also has a cost on our democracy. In the Bahamas today, there's a high degree of perceived distrust in our democracy. Moreover, citizens feel as if they have no input in the way the country is actually being run. And all decisions and deals are made behind closed doors, thus creating a veil of secrecy. We have to be real though. We cannot completely eliminate corruption. Corruption has existed for many centuries, but we can actually mitigate it. Be it through the various anti-corruption reforms that were discussed in the previous presentations, such as anti-corruption laws, freedom of information, the actual enforcement of the Public Disclosure Act, where members of Parliament must disclose their assets, liabilities, and incomes on an annual basis. Political campaign finance reform, where political parties must actually disclose their assets and their expenditures during political campaigning season. And also another important one that I would like to touch on is the public procurement system, where government contracts that are awarded are put out for public tender, and the bids of those contracts are released to the public. What I found from my experience and research on international best practices in the fight against corruption is that we not only have to enact the necessary anti-corruption laws, but we also have to start addressing the practical solutions by developing information and communications technology, ICTs, that improve government transparency, but the key word here is also including citizen participation in the decision-making process. And to do this is by open data. Open data is digital data that is made available with the technical and legal characteristics necessary for it to be used freely, reused, distributed by anyone, anytime, anywhere. And they must comply with the following principles: being open by default, timely and comprehensive, accessible and usable, for improved governance and citizen involvement, and for inclusive development and innovation. So I've now touched on a few examples of how open data has been used around the world to curb corruption. And I'll start with a small country by the name of Georgia. As I mentioned in my introduction, I, by fate, ended up, and I lived in Georgia for 2 years prior to returning to the Bahamas. Georgia is the former Soviet Republic. Between Russia in the north, you have Iran in the south, Turkey to the west, and Azerbaijan to the east. Georgia is a very peculiar situation. In 2004, Georgia was one of the most corrupt countries in the world. In the Corruption Perception Index that is published annually by Transparency International, Georgia was ranked 136 out of 146 countries in the Corruption Perception Index, just beating 10 countries such as Myanmar and other countries like Turkmenistan. But fast forward to 11 years later, Georgia's corruption perception index was 48 out of 168 countries. Now, what makes Georgia's situation very peculiar is that they did it in such a short period of time, 11 years. Not only was there the political will, but it was the actual citizens that pushed for the anti-corruption reforms. And I will address some of this. The anti-corruption legislations were enacted, but the tools were also implemented. Here's one website. It's called Tendermonitor, tendermonitor.ge, which is a public procurement website in Georgia. Here you can see the list of all government contracts that are awarded. You can see the supplier, information on the supplier, and you can also see information on the procurer. What's important about this website is managed by a civil society organization, Transparency International Georgia, and it's updated in real time. So for instance, if I wanted to see all the contract that was awarded to get all the office supplies in a certain ministry, for instance, the Ministry of Education, if I wanted to see how much the Ministry of Education actually paid for all office supplies, I can get that data right now. This strengthens public trust in the government. It also increases transparency and accountability. What is also another feature of this website is that journalists can sign on to it, as well as companies. So journalists can be alerted when a certain government department, who they may be monitoring, releases a tender. And a company will also be alerted when a certain contract that they may wish to bid for is also released to the public. Another website that Georgia has is called Chemi Parlamenti, which basically is translated to My Parliament. And with this website, as you can see here, it provides a profile of all parliamentarians in the Georgian Parliament. As you can see, Mr. Irakli Tripolsky, you can see his income that he made in 2014, being his salary and also business income. You can see also an important feature here, it shows his asset declarations. So all of his asset declarations are uploaded to this website for the public to view. And the most recent one, as you can see, is 2014. And that's what we have now. So this is another important tool that engages the citizens. We can see when Mr. Tripolsky actually entered Parliament, how much he had in the bank, what his assets were, and then we can trace that 5 years later and see what his assets are now. Another example, now moving from Georgia, I'll just give an example in Kenya. Kenya has the same thing. It's called Mizalendo, which means patriot in Swahili. With Kenya, it goes to another extent. It actually provides the public with scorecards to evaluate their politicians. So they can send messages via this website to each politician or parliamentarian, and they can receive responses to their questions from these parliamentarians. And then they have the scorecard which rates the responses, also rates their attendance in Parliament and also their ability to uphold their promises that are made. So all parliamentary appearances and their speeches are also updated to this website. So these are just tools that we can hold the government accountable to their actual promises and engaging the citizens. Another website I'd like to go. Now, this one is a UK-based website, which is called What Do They Know? I know that we've been discussing the Freedom of Information Act. This UK-based website, basically you submit a question to any government department. The question is submitted online. It is then processed to the appropriate government department, and the response is then generated back to the website. So you can see what questions I've presented to or asked the government department and the responses that I've received. And I can see the same thing for you as well. There are currently 137 countries that have an enacted Freedom of Information Act. Of those 137, there are about 50 countries that have an online Freedom of Information portal. They're accessible. Another online tool that we can use to hold the government accountable is through political campaign finance. I'd like to look at two countries specifically, Moldova. The Moldovan law states that the Central Electoral Commission shall publish on its webpage within 2 months from the date of elections the budget of expenditures for electoral campaign of each political party based on the information presented by the political parties. And then if you take it further in Latvia, declarations on all political parties and income and expenditure shall be published in the newspaper and on the internet within 10 days after they are submitted. So in Latvia, all the income and expenditures that these political parties have during a year of campaigning, they are submitted for the public to view in real time. The future of democracy is where the government and civil society work together to build an open government, and where we have web-based platforms, as I've demonstrated this morning, to encourage citizen participation, thus creating a new form of e-democracy. And I see there's a number of students here who are very tech savvy, I would assume, and this is something that we should push for from our elected officials in order to hold them accountable, so that we can see exactly how are they performing. This is definitely achievable in the Bahamas, given the high internet penetration. Currently, the Bahamas has a population of 390,000 with 333,000 internet users. That is an internet penetration of 85%. Public access to information strengthens social accountability mechanisms, as informed citizens are more likely to demand greater accountability from public officials. Not only is our continued lack of transparency and accountability in the Bahamas an affront to our democracy, but it is also a detriment to the development of our country as a whole. Thank you very much.